Today, I'd like to talk a little bit about the teachers themselves and your employees. I guess that would also include any staff member that reports directly to you. And school administration is kind of interesting because there are some people that report directly to you and you actually employ them. There are some people you have to work with who you don't employ, but you still have to work with them. And they're even employed. You know, they're not just, we talked about the elected people that we have to work with yesterday, but then there are employees. And I don't know, maybe not. Do you have influence in choosing your school office secretaries? I would hope that you do. That whoever those people are going to be, that you should interview them, you should supervise them, and you should be the primary contact for their employment. But you may have others that work for you or work under you, so to speak, like custodial services. Here at Faith Plano, custodial services are overseen by the Board of Trustees, not by me. So whenever I have a concern about bathrooms being clean, floors being swept, those kinds of things, I have to work through the Board of Trustees. My brother, who is the maintenance man at Emmanuel Lutheran School in Seymour, Indiana, is employed by his headmaster. So he has to answer to Dr. Beamlander. But not here at Faith Plano. So everybody has their own unique situation. I just want to talk to you a little bit about some issues of school employment. I just share some things that I use. One of them is where to find teachers. And one place to find teachers are our Concordias. I want to mention that first, okay? Our Concordias. And one thing I'd like to encourage all of us to do, all of us in classical Lutheran education, whether you think the Concordias will have a candidate for you or not, whether you think a particular Concordia will have a candidate for you or not, I encourage all of you that when you go through the district or synodical link, you know what I'm talking about, the portal, where you upload requests for teachers, for new candidate graduates, I would invite you to consider hitting all the buttons, hitting all the Concordias. I mean, what's the worst that's going to happen? There really isn't anything bad that could happen. I mean, maybe you'll get a flood of emails, maybe you won't from those schools, but I think it's important because we're telling those Concordias that we're looking for classical Lutheran educators.
I did that a year ago and I got one name.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Just
Sure.
Because the departments, they will know they need to have it, and it's not. How long we've been doing this?
Yeah.
Years,
There's a communication gap once those requests go in. But guess what? We wouldn't know there was a communication gap if we didn't actually try to submit the request. So we can say that is a great example. I got one hit.
I'll keep doing it.
And the truth is there may have been more. 3 years ago, I received teachers from Concordia University, Chicago, who never showed up from the placement director. Why? Because placement directors are the only candidates they have are who?
College of Ed.
College of Ed. And even more particular, those with, I call it LTD, those that have been prepared for synodical placement. Okay? So a lot of anybody else is going to be missed. So if you have someone at a school, let's say Concordia Irvine, who has a degree in history and has had a great Latin experience with Dr. Armstrong, their name is not going to show up by submitting that form. So, it sounds strange, but I think it's better for us overall in the long run if we still go ahead, even though we know we're probably not going to get the names we want, because it doesn't take much time. If it took us all day long or a bunch of hours, okay. But all you really have to do is cut and paste stuff that you've already prepared in other venues, throw it into this uploadable document, and send it to everybody. Send it to everybody, okay? Every now and again, you will get a hit, and I think our Concordias will become smarter at knowing who to pass this on to and who to ask. So the Concordias are definitely one, and I want to strongly encourage everybody to use the Concordia portal to let them know that you need a teacher. And I would even do it even if you're thinking, well, we really would like an experienced teacher, because we know sometimes we don't get to be choosers, right? So you've got to look at all of your avenues. So fill out that form. It's an online form, and send it to everybody. Now, yes?
Just a question. Have you ever personally contacted like a history department or an English department at one of the Concordias and said, I'm looking for somebody that doesn't have a
Yes, I have.
degree or whatever?
I have. I think Dr. Armstrong can kind of speak to this. You have had requests at Concordia University Irvine. You get calls from administrators, school boards.
A dozen every year, at least 2 or 3 of them from Lutheran classical schools, and the other 2/3 to half the requests they get every year from other schools that are local or regional, west, Colorado and left half. And they come to me personally because they're looking for classics. I'm a classicist. But we don't have a classics department, but I'm also in theology and I'm in history. And so it's just recent that Concordia Irvine and the administration that I deal with, my deans, my provosts, placement directors, etc., have moved to a more formalized program, a minor in classical education. And that in also consultation with our sister schools at Mequon and at River Forest. Tom Korchak is here, District Jason Sankson from Concordia, Wisconsin. He's here representing that program as well. We know the need for classical Lutheran education staff. We're trying to fill that need, but it's piecemeal. It's a little at a time, and often not coming with what we call LTD. Our classical ed minor does that, and I know Mequon's does. I know that River Forest's does. The other option is the strong liberal arts programs in those Concordias, of which our history program is the most rigorous major there is. It's all great texts because we know that need, not just for grad school, but for 4th grade Latin or for general education so that they can know trivium and quadrivium. Even if they're not going to go on to a classical school, we think that's important. And I think that's very valuable to find those networks, find those staff people, find those departments that you know are rigorous at whatever your local colleges are, right? And especially our Concordia colleges, because we have good programs. Some are better than others, but you need to know who those are, especially in literature, history, general education, those sorts of things.
Thank you. It's so glad to have you here for many reasons. But also you should get Dr. Armstrong's contact. Maybe you don't want your email flooded, but he's a great resource for us at Concordia University Irvine. Great resource. Concordia University Chicago, of course, you've heard from Dr. Korchak. He's also a great resource for us. I forget the name of the who's the prof here from Wisconsin?
Jason Sankson.
Jason
Sankson.
Okay. Sankson.
He's my classmate from Washington University.
Okay.
We Greek together.
Okay. Great.
He's a good guy.
So
Manuj is also involved in that. He's been really
right.
on point for it.
What a blessing to have 3 profs, right, at our CCLE conference, and each willing to be a voice for classical Lutheran education and give assistance to us who are looking for educators in our classrooms. One thing that want to share with you is what I've typically done is I've put together just a little bulletin point. I use these as bookmarks. I have traditionally, for the last 4 years, I have gone to the Hillsdale Job Fair as well. So I check out the Concordia, I go online, I fill out the form, I go to Hillsdale Job Fair, and I post on CCLE.org. Now, there are other avenues, but those are 3 that I know I'll probably get some hits from. Yes, sir.
If you don't need a teacher, do you still go to Hillsdale?
Well, I haven't been in that position yet in my first 4 years. Not trying to imply that we have vast turnover here. One of the great blessings of having a couple things, have you noticed how young our conference is? You look around, the young people, they get married, you know. So there's some mobility, I think, because there's a lot of youthfulness in our teachers. Not only youthfulness, some are retiring. And that's been our case here at Faith Plano, where we've had quite a few retirees, and we've replaced those. So those things cause mobility. Yes.
I was just going to comment on the Hillsdale piece. If you don't have the resources or don't think, you don't know if you need a teacher, they have an online portal. If you work through their placement, like student placement job office, and I can provide the name of the person. There's a portal, and you can actually pick a number of schools use this, like Grove City, Hillsdale, where you can post, a job posting, and they're alum or senior and current students. And you just get registered, and then you have access to like updating your information and things like that. And you can choose different schools around the country, or just one, if the case may be. So if you can't attend, you can still have access.
Mm-hmm. Another thing another idea is, if you're willing, if you do go to an event like that, gather resumes and be willing to possibly share them. And I usually ask the person for permission to share their resume. If they give it to me, I ask, may I share it with other administrators? Looks very simple, looks something like this. Basically the teaching opportunities, these were the teaching opportunities for this coming school year. Self-contained grade 3, math, science, history, Latin grades 6 through 12. By the way, a little strategy, I always, if I think that there may be some transition happening on staff, for instance, this year what happened was we had an excellent Latinist on faculty. Didn't know whether or not she was going to move up and take the Latin position. We'd been talking about that. We were still in conversation. But maybe another little hint here. You kind of need to know where you are staff-wise for the following school year, late January, early February. Why? Because that's when the job fairs are happening. And you kind of need to know where you are. Now, you're obviously not going to be 100%. You may be for that year. You may just hit the jackpot on that one. Many of you know that you'll find out in August 1 that somebody's not returning, and you have that kind of situation. But what I do is an intent to return form over Christmas break. And so asking that person to think ahead for next school year, so that way we can start making some sort of a plan for the following school year. Now, pick your own time cycle, but I would not wait till the end of the school year if I were you. So I put this together in January this year. Just a brief description, bullet point description: successful teachers at FLS Plano confess the Christian faith, teach the curriculum of a classical Lutheran education, care for the children entrusted to their care, communicate with all those associated with their vocation as teachers, participate as a communicant member of Faith Lutheran Church. That's required at our congregation. You have to be a member of our congregation. Observe the established rules and policies governing the school, grow as lifelong learners, read good books. So I published that. Some of you have already seen this before if you've been to ccle.org. I published that basic outline, what I'm looking for on all these places. And basically, it's also what I cut and paste into the synodical request form, the candidate form. So it tells them already in point number 2 that I'm looking for a classical Lutheran education teacher. What I do is I basically have them submit a cover letter and a resume to me at my email address. So that's how I basically gather teachers. I look in those places and put together a flyer like this and publish it in various locations. Does anybody else have a way that you've found teachers that you do every year, something unique that you've done?
I found them in the homeschool community.
Okay. Right.
I haven't found any, but I've looked at Wisconsin Synod schools
Okay.
and ELS.
All right. This is for our non-faculty staff hiring for instance, school secretaries. That's what we do here. New staff candidates identified through several means, probably very typical in your congregation. Congregation members submit nominations, faculty and staff submit nominations. We typically advertise in the congregation's bulletin and newsletter. We do not advertise in the local newspaper or more broadly. Again, because we like to hire members of the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod. Now, I know that there are those that prefer, I've heard the philosophy that we want to hire a non-Lutheran so that way we can fire them. Or we can, I personally, when you laugh, you might be careful because the guy next to you may believe that. I understand that philosophy. I don't hire for that reason. I don't hire for the potential possibility that I might need to fire you. If we need to fire you, we can do that if you're a Missouri Synod. I know it causes problems in the congregation, but you know what? The Baptist comes in, is a very lovely person, and gets very many friends in your school environment, and you end up with the same problem, my opinion. Because they know everybody, so forth. Dismissing someone's always nasty. It's necessary, but I don't hire with the possibility of having to fire you. So I have them do the same thing: cover letter and resume. Now I actually grade the cover letters because I think that they should write well. I'll even advise college kids, do not use smaller than a 12 font. Cannot stand when someone tries to cram 4 pages, fills up all the margins into a single page. So it's just, not that you won't get hired because of that, but you are presenting yourself on paper. And so I think that's important, what you choose to put on that sheet of paper. People that haven't updated their resumes, why did you bother doing that? What do you think I am? Think I'm just hiring anybody off the street? Why did you do that? Or they put together a generic resume that they're sending out to work any place, or maybe any old school. No, those people need to tailor to be hired by me in my classical Lutheran school. And I should see evidence of that they're trying to bring out those things that I might find of interest in their application. And so I would encourage you to even coach people that way. Coach people if you need to. because our young people need coaching. Okay. So basically what happens is I interview them, I make a suggestion to the board, and they're hired. The board does the hiring. The board does the hiring.
Can you talk a little bit more about when you say you made a recommendation? Do they then interface with the candidate, or is it more just they ask you questions?
I always invite board members to participate in interviews. At Faith Plano, I haven't had anyone that has joined me. Okay. So I proceed. I go, I do the interviews, I follow up, make sure you ask for recommendations, references, excuse me, and please do follow up on those references. Yeah, I would strongly advise you follow up on those references. And doesn't the reference that a person gives say something about them? You know, they don't want to include their administrators for the last 2 schools for some reason. That's, you know, why'd you do that? Is there something I need to know about that last school? You know, things like that. Just be smart about, you can learn a lot from a person's resume. You can learn a lot. And from their cover letter. So what I do is that I basically put together a package, electronic package. I upload them to Google Drive. I've become a big fan of Google Drive. I make it accessible to all the board members. That includes typewritten or a word processed, sorry, I slipped there. Word processed documents that summarize the interview that I had for not only with the person, but also with the reference that I checked. And when I make my recommendation, okay, well, you've had access to all the documents for the past week. You know, board members, it's your responsibility to read them and to know about that individual. So, any questions about that? Or let's see here. It's very similar for the faculty. That was for non-staff, but really faculty is the same thing. One thing I want to share with you, employees that you have already hired. One of the big things that is going on among us today, God help us, but there's all kinds of trouble with ethical issues with teachers and students, sexual misconduct. We had, in one of our Lutheran schools in the Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex, we had a situation, okay? I use it as a teaching opportunity for our faculty. The situation was that a young female teacher was accused of an inappropriate relationship with a young high school student. The teacher was questioned, but the administration sort of sided with the teacher that nothing really happened. The student wasn't confessing anything at the time, but interestingly, the teacher moved on. It happened toward the end of the school year, and the teacher moved on several months later, moved up north. Well, after several months had passed, guess what student decided to do? Open up and say, well, I didn't say anything at the time, but, you know, then you have lawsuits. Whether they did anything wrong or not, I guess the judges and all those people have to decide. But it did open the school up to, it opened up a liability issue for sure. And, you know, in the Texas district, I called Bill Hins on this. Bill Hins is our Texas district exec. One of the best ways that we can protect teachers is actually by utilizing the law. Because the school administration is always going to look fuzzy, I think, in the eyes of parents and when it hits the newspapers. So part of his advice is that if there's suspect of wrongdoing, there's an accusation that is brought, utilize the local police to intervene and to perhaps find this person innocent, that they didn't do anything wrong, clear up their name. But after the accusation's made, their name's already mud anyway, I mean, unfortunately. But to involve the local police, and it kind of cleans up the situation for the school as well. We didn't try to cover it up, which is exactly what this school was accused of doing, trying to cover up. I don't believe that they did try to cover it up. That school administrator, tenured school administrator, have every reason to believe that he did what he thought was right. And I truly think that he was convinced that this teacher didn't do anything wrong. But nevertheless, it was interesting that this teacher moved up north, and when word broke of the lawsuit that was being brought against the school, and the lawsuit basically claimed a mismanagement. Now you understand what happens when you go through mismanagement. Mismanagement is, now we're going to look at your handbook that I was talking to you about yesterday. And yes, the handbook must reflect the law of the land, but even more so, the particular procedures for dealing with issues like this. Did you follow it? Did you follow what you said you would do? And of course, then the other question is, what you said you were going to do, does it meet the standard of law? Does it meet the standard of law? That court case, as far as I know, is going on right now. I don't know how it's going to turn out. So it serves as, a couple things. One, these things, unfortunately, are probably going to happen to us. Somebody is going to get hit with something like this. And have policies in place. Make sure that they're following the rule of law. And what you've added to that policy, outside of the rule of law, or within the rule of law, I should say, make sure you do it consistently, including for the ones who aren't accused. Everybody has to equally follow this policy, because that's part of what happens when you get drugged before a court, is do you faithfully follow this practice? And that's really true in all things, even your confession of faith, right? If you're letting some things slide, but other things you're saying no to, then you're saying, well, you've got a policy, but you're not really following it. All right, it just looks bad. It works against you in a court of law. So I basically sent out an email after this saying, hey, I'm not accusing anybody of anything, but are you aware? Sent the link to the news, online newscast, and said, here's what's going on. Sent a copy of the Texas District Ethical Guidelines saying, hey, the best thing I can do for you if an accusation comes is to talk to the police department about it, put you on administrative leave until we find out what's going on. I'm not suggesting that you have to do that, but I am suggesting that you have a plan in case it does happen. Your district can be great help to you, by the way. Your district can be great help to you. Want to share a couple other things. How much time do I have here? About 15 minutes, is that right? Let me back out of this. The supervision of faculty. Rather than going into that, Dr. Jackie Veith had an excellent presentation yesterday, and I don't know if it's just a repeat section on if you have any questions about doing observations, formative and summative evaluations, observations. She has a lot of good stuff there. You can also go and look here. I have some of the same things that Jackie had, but she had a lot more than I had. So you might check with her. Or if you receive something or you want to upload, remember, you can take but also give to this Google document. Let's see. The other thing I wanted to talk to you about are some in-services. these are just a few that I've uploaded. I don't know about your school, but my school, we often don't have the money to send everybody even to the CCLE conference. We did this year because we're here. But, by the way, if you ever host a CCLE conference and the CCLE treats you like they in a good way, okay. The bonus, the good thing is you don't have to pay for housing and transportation, okay, so you get to save all that money. The bad thing is you still pay full cost to send your teachers here. You don't get a discount for that, so you still have to pay the registration fees. That's a lot of money, isn't it? It's a lot of money. So maybe that's your only opportunity for professional development throughout the year, but it doesn't have to be, okay? And what I would suggest is coming up with some in-services that you can do throughout the school year. And I want to show you a couple that I have done. One of the ones that I put together is this one that it's called Effective Teaching. And I put together from some resources. One, I'm a big fan. I know he's a big progressive educator, but Harry K. Wong. I'm a Harry. Who's heard of Harry K. Wong? Okay, you either love Harry or you don't like Harry, but I think he has a lot of good advice, practical advice. And it came to my mind after we did CCLE at CTSFW, What is the Good? Where we talked about good order. That's classroom management. That's classroom management. So I borrowed some things. For instance, here is a PowerPoint that I put together on called The First Days of School. And I could open it, show you, you can go explore it on your own, but it's based upon Harry K. Wong's First Days of School. There's also another good book by a guy named Lamav. And anybody, you know who I'm talking about? Teaching 2.0 or something along that line. Lemov, Lamav. And Alex Ring, Pastor Ring was here yesterday. He, by the way, we had Pastor Ring is a native of Dallas area, but he is the secretary, basically the head of the ELS schools. And so we were very blessed to have him here yesterday as part of our CCLE attendees. But I picked up Doug Lemov. I picked up Doug Lemov from Alex Ring a couple years ago. He uses it with his schools. I had How to Have Your Classroom Ready. By the way, these first two PowerPoints are excellent, I think, for first-year teachers. So borrow them, edit them, do whatever you want to with them. Sit down and walk through these with your teachers apart from everybody else. You can do it with everybody else too, but walk through this with first-year teachers, how to have your classroom ready.
Teach like a champion.
Teach like a champion, right, thank you. Here's one just basically on classroom management. And here I was beginning to use what I call truth statements, or in this case, I called it thesis. If you want to talk more about that for curriculum, that's another session. The effective teacher is an extremely good classroom manager. That was my truth statement for that PowerPoint presentation. Inviting students to learn, invitational versus disinvitational. 6 examples of positive framing. This was a Doug Lemov frame, borrowed heavily from Doug Lemov. So these are things that I would say complement classical education. They're not the core necessarily of our curriculum, those kinds of things. But, you know, our classical education, as most of administration is, really the kingdom of the left. It's the temporal kingdom where the rule of law, good order rules. And so as administrators, we keep that in mind, right? We can borrow from good order, classroom management, best practices in classroom management. I'm a big fan of teachers using nonverbal cues. That has nothing to do with Melanchthon and Bugenhagen, Luther, or anything like that. At least I don't hear anything about that. May not have anything to do with Latin in particular. But those kinds of things help me deliver Latin. They help me deliver the good books, the great books. And so in that sense, these things are necessary. And while we need to have the faculty involved in reading good literature and studying the confessions, because that's part of this one. I used a CPH resource on the Augsburg Confession and its apology. Some would say, well, there's much better than that. Well, okay, but I'm a busy administrator, okay? So I used their 13-part outline, and I filled in the blanks as we went through the school year, things that I thought I would add to that resource. And so what I did was basically once a month, you can kind of see this schedule, beginning August 30th all the way through May the 16th, we worked through the entire Augsburg Confession and its apology. Did we hit every aspect? Did we read it in the Latin? Did we read it? No, we didn't do all that. But we were able to get through a good portion of this. We have faculty meetings every Wednesday for 45 minutes. And my promise to the faculty is they will only last 45 minutes. Only last 45 minutes. And they will start on time, and we will end on time. So if you keep that keep that promise to your faculty. If you say that, well, this was really important today, and we had to go a little bit further because it was about Jesus, Well, okay, but their time is precious to them. And I go to a lot of meetings, but I cannot stand going to meetings. Meetings are awful for me. I don't like meetings. I like the Jeff Bezos rule for meetings, whether to include myself in a meeting, because I get invited to a lot of meetings, but Jeff Bezos, the Amazon guy, he says that if you can't feed everybody present at the meeting with 2 pizzas, then you've invited too many people to be present at the meeting. And then I always add the extra qualifier that if I'm not going to do enough work at that meeting to even get hungry for a piece of pizza, I'm not going to go. Just not going to show up.
Do you have other full day in service, or how many days before and after school, or before school year and after school year?
Okay, so I have full faculty and staff. I have 2 mornings from 9 to noon. And before school,
For how long?
from 9 to noon,
No, I mean, how many weeks? Or what?
2 days. I told you I don't like meetings. So do we do a lot of work in those 3 hours? Yes. We hit the highlights. What I'm really focused on those first meetings is things that I want to get done during the first few weeks of school. And some things may be ongoing, but why tell everybody what we're going to do second semester when they're going to forget most of it anyway? I'm going to have to remind them over and over and over again. So we really focus on the things that are necessary. I do meet in smaller groups with other groups of teachers. So there are small group afterwards. Always scheduling is a big deal. I continue to meet with new teachers during that time. So it isn't as if I don't stop having meetings, but as a faculty and staff, we only meet from 9 to noon for 2 days before school. Some have to come for first aid and CPR training, things like that. Those little things continue to go on as well. But as a faculty, everybody only those 2 days. I do the same thing at the end of the school year. We meet from 9 to noon. On the last day, we all go out to eat. And we have 1 potty break for 10 minutes. So everyone knows when the potty break is, and we get ready for that. So the other thing I would encourage you to do is go ahead and one thing that I would like to do, and maybe some of you have done this, I really think that the faculty as a whole ought to have instruction in Latin. Everybody. So I'm going to let Aubrey, my Latin teacher, get her feet wet this year, teach Latin grades 6 to 12. Then at some point, I'm going to say, okay, you're up 10 times a year, and help us walk through, basic Latin or something along that lines. Because I also think that we can all read books about classical education. There's a lot of good books about classical education. But think about it, if we want to be classically educated, we really need to read the good books. That's how we ought to educate ourselves for what we do in the classroom. So we need to read those good books. We need to read the scriptures. We need to read the confessions, not just read about it, textbook form, but actually read it and do it. And I would include Latin in that. So those are some ideas for. Oh, I also did Veith's book on spirituality of the cross. If you're interested, I put together a study guide, and that's also on there. It's a decent book to use with faculty. All right, any questions about that? All right, I have a couple minutes here.
Daily faculty devotion or a daily
Yes, we have a,
see everybody on a daily?
yes, 10, 15 minutes every morning, right. I have some other things I've uploaded, again, from the secular world. I think, now some of you may disagree with me on this, but I really think that Forbes.com has some interesting articles to help with thinking about management, leadership, things of that sort. And this doesn't sound very classical, but I think these things are necessary in service to classical Lutheran education. One of the Forbes.com articles that I've uploaded for you is 10 ways to spot a truly exceptional employee. I thought this one was really, really good. And I'll hit the highlights here. 1, they neutralize toxic people. 2, they're marketable. 3, they're accountable. 4, they recognize when things are broken and fix them. 5, they're never satisfied. 6, they're in control of their egos. 7, they're judiciously courageous. 8, they focus. 9, they can tolerate conflict. 10, they're willing to delay gratification. I think that's a pretty good article there.
Another website that's good like that is ink.com.
What's that?
Ink.com.
Ink.com? Okay. There are,
Business-oriented kind of.
right, some of the principles of school leadership and things like that, like with anything else, we have to filter them, but things we find beneficial, I think we can utilize. Sort of on a generic note, want to introduce another idea, something that I've read and I've thought about how can we use this in classical Lutheran schools. And I know this is kind of a dated book, but it's called Blue Ocean Strategy. Anybody ever heard of Blue Ocean Strategies? About really creating new markets and that kind of a I think that I'd love to see someone who has put this into practice. There's a classical Christian school in Florida that used Blue Ocean Strategy marketing as the framework by which they started up their school in Florida. So that was interesting that a classical school used this marketing strategy to start their classical Christian school. All right. And one last thing, we'll finish. There's a Missouri Synod Lutheran named Chuck Evans. Some of you know him from Evans and Littlejohn, Wisdom and Eloquence, that little book. He now is into school leadership and funding schools, leadership development, those kinds of things. His name is Chuck Evans, Charles Evans. He sends out a free letter every so often. And his group is called Better Schools LLC. Better Schools LLC, equipping independent schools with tools to thrive. Better Schools LLC. Chuck Evans, senior partner. Now, I mentioned Chuck Evans. Chuck Evans, before he started Better Schools LLC, was the headmaster at Regent School of Austin. Anybody ever been to Regent School of Austin?
I placed a student there once.
Awesome. I did a site visit back when Chuck Evans. I'm sorry, what'd you say?
I placed a student there once from Concordia Irvine.
Okay. Awesome school. Regent School of Austin, awesome, wonderful school, beautiful facilities. During their going and blowing years, their construction days, when the sidewalks were always muddy and there was always orange tape somewhere, Chuck Evans was their headmaster during that 5-6 year stint, during their major growth period. He catechized into the LCMS and is an LCMS Lutheran. He has, years ago, had presented at CCLE conferences. Now we have to pay him lots of money to present at CCLE conferences. But if you want a resource with a guy that knows a lot, you're going to have to pay for him. I will tell you that, because that's not a bad thing, okay? He's making his living off Better Schools LLC, so we have to consider that. But he's a great resource, and he's a Missouri Synod Lutheran, and he knows a lot about classical schools. Just look at Regents. Go to their website. You'll see what Chuck was a part of. Okay, next time, take a look at some legal issues tomorrow, okay? Thank you. Have a good lunch.